Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to wait a minute before getting started, but we're super excited about our webinar on Automate, Accelerate, and Win for VMS Business. For those of you who are coming in, thanks so much for joining today. We're going to give it just 30 more seconds before we get started so that folks can come in and watch the entire webinar. All right, well, let's get started. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. I know that it's National Nurses Week this week, so I know that everyone's giving a little bit of extra love to their travel and per diem nurses. So thanks to those of our nurses who are, helping care for different people across the country. So today we're here to talk about Automate, Accelerate, and Win, how you can use different AI and VMS strategies in order to increase your speed for submissions for providers. So I'm Sophia Chang. I'm Senior Product Marketing Manager here, focused on healthcare and VMS Sync. And I have with me Ahad and also Anne-Marie, both solutions consultants who are going to give you a look at what this actually looks like in the Bullhorn platform specific to healthcare. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So this session is being recorded, and afterwards we'll share the recording with you. Everyone right now is on mute, just to make sure that folks can hear our different speakers, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. So please feel free to drop in different comments in the chat, as well as different questions that you have, and we'll make sure to get to it towards the end of our time today. So what we're going to cover is we're going to cover the state of the industry. So we just released our Grid 2025 Industry Trends Report for the Healthcare Spotlight. Then we'll do a quick overview of AI and automation and what that can look like in healthcare staffing and also on Bullhorn. And then Ahad and Anne-Marie, they're both going to go through a demo of our different capabilities that we have today for VMS Sync, AI, and different automation capabilities. And then we will reserve a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So again, definitely feel free to drop in different questions that you have. We'll try to answer it in text or live here on the webinar. And certainly if we don't get to it, we'll answer after the webinar is over. So drop in all your questions. We want to hear from you. Okay, so let's level set on what we are seeing in the VMS MSP market. So according to SIA and their 2024 report, 2023 in North America, we saw an 8% contraction. While overall, in general, globally, it's a negative 2% contraction. And so for a few years now, healthcare has experienced a contraction due to things still normalizing after the pandemic. So things have been really challenging for a few years. And what we're hearing from our healthcare customers is that rec volume is down, even from a VMS perspective. Everyone's feeling that margin pressure, especially with MSP fees also going up, where some of them are almost 10%. And then there's this ongoing provider shortage. So finding the right talent for the different opportunities that you do have remains difficult. And so here's what we heard from our healthcare staffing professionals. So we had over 200 responses that responded to the Grid industry survey in healthcare staffing in North America. And here's what they shared with us. So some of their top strategies for improving financial performance is focusing on market share. So really trying to find new clients or trying to do more business with the clients that they're already working with, including VMSs. Right. And in order to increase profitability, they're looking for a couple of different ways in terms of increasing efficiency and reducing costs, using technology to improve recruiter and their team productivity, while also moving the bottom line and diversifying their business lines, trying to find different revenue sources with higher revenue or perhaps higher margins. There we go. All right, and digital transformation. So for the first time since 2023, the number of firms that have said that they're in the advanced stages of digital transformation has actually dropped. And so the reason for that is because we believe that AI has really upped the ante for what it means to digitally transform your healthcare staffing business. And it's still very early, right? And there's also a whole bunch of different complexities when it comes to healthcare and compliance that's unique to healthcare staffing. So let's take a step back and also talk a little bit about automation before we go full AI mode. So in terms of how firms are using automation, they're using it for searching for different candidates to match to jobs, recruiter admin tasks, and that can also include taking the jobs in the VMS and making sure it's showing up correctly in the ATS, screening applicants, even submitting candidates, right? So it may not be as high, but it's still a focus in terms of how you can use automation in order to increase your speed to market. And if you look at the adoption of AI, 51% of healthcare staffing firms are experimenting with AI, but only 13% have actually invested in an AI solution. So we're still very much in early adoption phases of AI, but nearly 2/3 of staffing firms are using AI in some capacity. And that only leaves really 19% that's not using AI at all. So there's a lot of folks out there experimenting, trying to see what's working. And in our response to our survey for healthcare staffing professionals, they predict that AI could save recruiters 19 hours per week. So that's almost half of your week out of a 40-hour work week. And most of those savings can come from searching for candidates to match to jobs, recruiter administrative tasks, and that can also include, processing a lot of those VMS jobs, as well as submitting different candidates up here for 3 hours. So there's a lot of savings across the board when it comes to increasing the efficiency of your recruiters. And in terms of how they're actually using it today, our respondents shared that, for over 40%, they're using it for better job matches, faster response time, more personalized outreach. And there's definitely some more room here for all the other different tasks in terms of how AI can help. And that probably speaks to, how folks are kind of using it in areas that they feel a lot more comfortable with, low hanging fruit, things like that. But there's definitely opportunity around using it in these other parts of staffing. And not only did we talk to healthcare staffing professionals, but back in the fall, we also surveyed our healthcare providers. And they also shared that they're ready to engage with AI. So 60% of healthcare candidates share that they're comfortable with AI handling every stage of their recruitment process. And 65% share that that AI has actually resulted in faster response times, which is incredibly important in terms of following up with different people, maintaining different relationships. And 78% also share they would work with an AI powered recruiting assistant if it sped up the process. So there's a lot of value here to speed and also finding providers the right job. And when it comes to dealing with like a talent shortage, this experience for them, as well as increasing efficiencies for you, is going to be important. All right, so now I'm going to transition to VMS, AI, and automation and how you can increase speed to market. So Bullhorn's vision for AI is that we have an AI assistant that helps recruiters complete tasks efficiently, but we also have AI agents, and that can automate and complete entire tasks and workflows independently. And how this works is that we have the Bullhorn sea of data. We have over 22 billion data points across recruiting, across all of our different platforms. And it's specific, enormous, and actionable. And really what we're using is we have trained an AI model based off of 800 million candidates and 60 million different placements. And so we know what works and we train the model on that. Okay, so how this works is that we leverage VMS Sync in order to have VMS jobs land in your ATS. So we have over 110 integrations today for VMSs, for VMS Sync jobs, and it allows you to have cleaner data in your ATS in addition to just having it in there. So it normalizes that data across all your different VMSs, and it also increases the data quality from a parsing perspective. What you can use then is our AI enrichment agent. And so you can enrich information outside of the VMS and make sure that your provider and job information stays up to date. You can then use the matching agent, and that allows you to find the top providers for the job with category, specialty, states that they're licensed in, and more. And then once you have the right candidate, you can message them and send personalized outreach saying, like, hey, we have this job that's really close to your alma mater. Do you like, I think this would be an appealing job for you. Once you have those candidates that you're in touch with, you can screen them. You can have either AI generated questions or questions that you put in there. They'll ask your different providers and give you a score and analyzes the fit. Once you have those top candidates that have said, yes, like I definitely am interested in this job, you can submit them using VMS Sync submittals. And so we've invested a ton in terms of deepening that functionality as well as increasing the number of integrations that we have. And all that so that you can spend more time. Hopefully, if the staffing professionals are responding to our surveys correct around saving recruiters 19 hours, they can spend a lot of that time building relationships with providers and also focusing on other high value work. And now I'm going to hand things off to Ahad, who's going to show us VMS Sync.
Thank you, Sophia. So I'm going to start within a traditional VMS portal. In my case, we're looking at a health trust portal. And really the focus of VMS Sync and submittals is to provide a solution that helps us address the two strategies that are most important within the VMS world. And that is going to be speed to market and quality to submission. So typically what we find is from a manual VMS workflow, it's a lot of time being spent with administrative tasks such as data transfer from our requisition in our portal into creating that information into Bullhorn, and then when submitting, that same kind of concept. So VMS Sync and submittals is going to help us address that issue. So we're going to take a look at a specific position directly within the system in the VMS portal. So typically what happens is I'll receive an email, and within that email, I have to scramble to get that login. So being able to log into the positions themselves, and then finding those positions is always going to be a challenge, and it's also going to be somewhat time consuming. Once the requisition does populate, well, that's always great. Once the position does populate, then at that point, a lot of times it's a matter of copy pasting that information back into my ATS. What VMS Sync is going to allow me to do is within under a minute, automatically create that requisition from our VMS portal and create that within Bullhorn. Now, there's not much to show on the sync side of things in regards to how this actually processes, right? There's a couple of important pieces here that are important to call out. The first is a little bit of that data enrichment using the VMS Sync technology of normalization contextualization, which is really just kind of a fancy way of saying being able to take the information provided by our clients within the portals and then normalize that into useful job titles and job descriptions within our ATS. The purpose of this is really so we can get a job that is ready to start being filled by our recruiting team. Anne-Marie is going to also explain a little bit more detail on how we're able to infuse AI to even facilitate this and make this an even less manual process. But what we find is from a manual perspective, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes per requisition to get it from our VMS portal and entered into our Bullhorn database. This allows us to shorten that time frame to under a minute. Now, additional challenges that we always do run into, the first one I alluded to, which is password management. So not only are we going to have the ability to automatically sync our positions from our from our portal into our ATS, we're also going to have additional controls with a control center provided to you where we can manage all of the credentials that we basically have in one singular place. But additionally, from there, specific to healthcare, also the controls that we have within the ability of us to link any of the specific facilities in our VMS portal to the company name or facility name that we have existing within our Bullhorn environment. So what this allows us to do is whether our client is actually posting the job or the requisition under the specific facility or potentially the ward that that facility might be or that job might be placed in, we then have the ability to basically sync these requisitions to the facilities within our ATS. So it really allows us to basically ensure that every time we have information coming in, we know what client that's specifically associated with within our system as well. Additionally, from there is going to be the concept of rules. This is a newer investment that we've actually created, but what it allows us to do is determine how we actually want those requisitions coming into our database to be treated once they hit the database. So a common example that we tend to see here is if, for example, the detail or the job title provided in that requisition is clinical health director, then when it hits my Bullhorn environment, I want certain things to occur. So I can automatically assign it a specific category if I wish to organize my positions. I can also assign it a specific tier level as far as this is a really high value tier or a low value tier. I can assign it directly to a specific client and say automatically file this to this client and this hiring manager, for example. So a lot of controls structured off of if this is the data that exists within the requisition, then I want this job to be added under these specific conditions. This is also another way that we can also filter out specific positions that we don't want to incorporate. So this gives us the capability to shorten that 5 to 10 minutes of requisition intake and really bring this down to under a minute and almost near real time in regards to getting that information into the system. Now, with that being said, we'll go ahead and move over to the next concept, which is going to be the submittals. This is kind of the newer feature that's been added into the system. We're going to kind of fast forward a little bit. Now, Anne-Marie is going to get into the more details and nitty gritty of how I'm able to generate automatically matched candidates using AI. In our scenario, we're going to jump a little bit forward and we're going to say we're prepared at this point to begin our submission process. So I'm going to start off with Joseph Morgan here, who is my candidate. So I can always take a look and I can see the resume, any of the details, any of the past notes, any of the submission history. So directly from here, I wish to present Joseph Morgan. Now, to do this, I can simply go through and select my VMS submittal section, and this is going to load a specific form that we've designed and we've curated specific to the client portal themselves. So I know even though I may be in Health Trust, I may have clients that have various different requirements. So we'll take a look at what that will look like from the form side, but a couple important pieces to call out first and foremost. One, once I do select Joseph, so I'll go ahead and enter in his candidate ID here. First thing that you'll notice is it'll automatically indicate that I've already submitted Joseph to this job and to this VMS portal before. Now, I always have the option to continue, and if I chose to continue, I could use this and create a brand new one, but we'll take a look at it from a candidate that I haven't submitted. This kind of speaks to that integration that we have between the VMS portal and your ATS by being able to recognize and make sure that we're not double submitting candidates to the same requisition or potentially to the same client. Now, another thing to call out here is going to be the draft workflow. The whole goal of being able to actually achieve our speed to market and our quality to submission is ideally to meet those KPIs that our clients are measuring us against. And the higher we achieve with those KPIs, the better and stronger that relationship gets. And so we've actually had a lot of clients that are using this solution that have began to achieve that top tier relationship with our VMS clients. and that provides them early access capabilities. So a request that we had received was, it would be great if we were able to get individuals queued up because we had early access to a position. So this is what the draft workflow allows me to do. This will basically allow me to queue up candidates that I think are going to be a great match once I'm notified that this job is going to be added to the VMS portal and to a future date. So I can actually start to shortlist a series of candidates and automatically fill out their draft forms with the fields that our client requires. And then, of course, if there are any additional fields. So when that does become a released requisition in that VMS portal, I'm already going to have a list of candidates curated that I'm going to begin submitting with all of the information completed. Now, that being said, let me show you what I'm referring to when I mention the information that's going to be completed. So I'm going to switch over to Ava Green here. We're going to select Ava to process. So when I actually click create, this is going to load the unique form or field data that is required by our client. So in this scenario, they're going to ask for a specific date of birth. So I'll go ahead and birth here. So I've entered that information in. Actually correct that here. And any of the unique information that they may require at this point, we can add that information in as well. And you'll note that there are a series of different fields that are going to be unique to each individual client and requisition portal. This gives us the capability to ensure that when we're submitting these candidates, we're meeting the bare requirements that our client will need. And I'll be able to see that by basically saying, show me only the required fields. So at the bare minimum, I can ensure that this information is completed accurately. So when I submit this document, it's going to meet the requirements for my client. If, however, we opt to actually provide more information and more detail to our clients, I can actually show all of the fields directly from here. Once I have this information completed, now there are going to be a couple of really key components to help facilitate passing this information over. And the first that I'm going to note is our ability to index our candidate records. So directly from here, I typically want to attach a resume to my submission. Rather than having to download a resume from Bullhorn and then re-upload it back into the portal, we are going to be able to index the file tab that exists on our candidate record and choose the appropriate file. So in this scenario, I can preview the resume that I'm wishing to submit for Ava. If this is the correct one, I can now select that and add that into this submission. Additionally, from there, a lot of times we may need to submit some credentials. So I also have the ability to select off of the credential requirements and choose the specific credential that I'm uploading, select the appropriate credential, and then upload that, as well as provide an expiration date if needed. So this really gives us that deep integration into our system between our VMS portal as well as our ATS. Now, if this was a scenario where I wanted to create a draft workflow, I could complete that. I could click save. This would create Ava as one of my queued up candidates or shortlisted candidates. However, we're going to say that this position is currently live. So now what I have the ability to do is to click submit via confirmation. Now it's going to walk through this digital handshake, indicating all of the validation that it's basically doing to ensure that this submission is going to be successfully accepted while meeting all of my client requirements. This helps us elevate that concept of quality of submission. We never have to worry about a rejected submission after we've processed that because we missed a specific piece of data or we didn't include something appropriately. This allows me to actually process the submission directly within my Bullhorn system without also having to log back into my VMS portal in order to process that submission. As it's actually working through this, I can continue to move on and start doing other activities within Bullhorn without worrying about interrupting that submission process. So we can still continue to be productive instead of having to watch this process and this form going through. Now, additionally, from there, as we're waiting for that to process through, I can now come through and also control some of the submittal mappings. Now, the submittal mappings is another way that we have the ability to facilitate the speed in processing our submittals. And this is basically going to be indicated based off of my ability to pre-populate from my ATS any of the fields that we may want to actually complete. And I can choose them either from the job record, the company record, or my candidate data as well. So it allows us to ensure that when I actually generate that VMS submittal form that we completed in order to process the submission, I can pre-populate as many of those fields as possible, once again, reducing the amount of manual data entry that I would require otherwise. And so once we actually have this process through, this gives us the capability to then successfully submit our candidates back into our VMS portal, and therefore shortening the speed to submittal and processing that through. And this is also another great point here to basically indicate that there are error codes that we can track to ensure if there is any missing information that we may have included that may have actually caused any issues. It will also process that, once again, ensuring that we don't run into any of those failed submissions. Now, with that being said, I am now going to go ahead and move on to the process of leveraging AI in order to enhance this process even further. So I'm going to pass this over to Anne Marie. So Anne Marie, I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ahad. I will share my screen now. Take those reins. So, like VMS sync and submittals that can make the process seamless from a job intake to submitting the provider, we know there are several steps involved between those two critical points. So if we think back to one of the first slides Sophia spoke about, really improving that financial performance, 46% of firms are looking to technology to improve that recruiter productivity. So this is really where I like to say AI enters the chat. So we're offering efficiency gain in those key areas where staffing firms are focusing, things like search and match, screening and evaluating candidates, and the dreaded admin that we all have to do. So embedded into Bullhorn's core is the AI assistant, and that is a powerful engine with custom prompt technology that provides the actions and power to create agentic actions. So when you think about that job coming in through the VMS portal, right? Even with normalization, we're often sometimes missing limited information, right? There's no specific formatting. We need to, pretty this up to be able to publish this out and start getting those providers to apply. And this is where we can come into our AI assistant. We can select things like tone. So when we're thinking about a published job, maybe we're looking at something a little bit more neutral or business. We can think about length too, right? Depending on where we're publishing this job, maybe there's a character limitation that we might have. When we think about AI assistant, though, there's much more than just creating a public job description or enriching that job description that we can use AI assistant for. So when we think about outreach and engagement with our providers, maybe it's going to be drafting a check-in message, seeing how their 13-week assignment might be going. That's where maybe we need to look at a recommended value that's going to be a little less because we want to send this out via SMS. So after we're going through and creating all of these different pieces, we're able to generate this actual content. And this is really where that administrative burden tends to fall, right? When we think about having to create these published job descriptions, those check-in messages, those summaries for those provider profiles, all of those things that we're doing, that can really wear on the brain. It can be taxing. And if we think about all of that brain power towards the end of the day, the consistency is likely not there. And that's where AI assistant can come in and start creating those candidate and client pitches, those notes and summaries, extracting different data and filling in fields too when we think about powering that through automation. So we're really able to take away some of the areas where that, productivity tends to strain. But what's really important is we're able to use our AI assistant on our job records, on our candidate records when we're thinking of some of those candidate specific ways that we might want to reach out, that engagement. But we're also able to come into our prompt studio, which is really important because this is where you're able to take the reins and create any of those prompts that are going to be specific to your business. So out of the box, our AI assistant is going to come with 15 different prompts, but we know healthcare is, special, it's specific. There's going to be different needs that your business is going to have. This is where you get to create. I like to say this is where you're the filmmaker and you're directing your movie. And that's because this is where we're able to choose the right words, phrases, structures to get the best response. So when we're thinking about that prompt, right? Are we going to have the voice of the recruiter? So this doesn't feel generic. It feels like it's coming from that recruiter to that provider or to that contact. Or if we're creating that job description, right? We're really providing that voice. We're able to give the specific instructions. So this is where you set those guardrails up. How are we going to look at this specific prompt? How do we want it to act? We're also able to come in here and start creating those different data points we want it to look at to create this content. This is super powerful because we already know Bullhorn has a treasure trove of information. How do we start using it to create some of this generative content? And ultimately, all of these pieces go into creating our prompt over here on that right-hand side, where we can start iterating like that filmmaker when they're in that production room and they're working with their production assistants, right? We can start coming in here and creating all of this information. So when we're looking to extract things like years of experience, so our recruiter right away can look exactly at Taylor, that provider, and understand how many total years of nursing experience Taylor has, where those have been, if there's been any kind of travel assignments that Taylor might have taken, in the past. We're able to start extracting that type of information, which becomes really, really powerful. Now, this is one way we can look at our AI, but we can also power that through automation to start actually sending out and using all of this data agentically, meaning no one needs to get involved. So when we have that job come in through that VMS portal, it can automatically generate that public job description. We're presetting what we want that to look like, and then it can go ahead and create that public job description for us with no human intervention, no account managers, no recruiters, nobody needs to do anything. And when we're thinking about it from a provider perspective, maybe some of that output, right, of those check-ins, let's see what they're excited about with their current assignment, maybe what their plans are for winter time when we have some of those needs. We can also take back all of that communication and write it back to notes. So we always have that visibility of any of that content that's going out. So again, there's still that control in place. But as we start to look through kind of getting that job in, enriching that job, there's several other areas where we really want to make improvements when we're thinking about productivity in terms of what recruiters need to do on a day-to-day. So when we think about our job here, there's oftentimes screens that need to happen. So we can actually have AI come in and start creating different screening questions. By default, you can have questions as well that you want asked during every single screen that might be happening. Like Sophia mentioned, our providers, they are interested in interacting with AI, but it's only if it's going to be providing value and providing that speed. So let's go ahead and set up all of these different screening questions to understand more about that provider, get that experience that they might have. So by default, we can have these questions like, why are you interested in this role? We can also have questions generated by our AI. So things that are looking at that job description and pulling out information of what might be applicable to what we would ask a provider in that screen to better understand their knowledge. And all of this is going to happen again without anybody needing to intervene, no recruiters that need to come in and actually create any of those screening questions. Although you can see on the right-hand side, you have the ability based on user permissions to come in and make those edits if needed. Be able to have that control again where you see fit. Now, what's important too is once we have all of these screening questions queued up, we also want to look at how we're starting to match those candidates, because that's another really big area that your recruiters are likely spending a majority of the time. In fact, I believe the last stat that I heard was it's about 35% of the day. So about a third of what they're doing is, sourcing providers for these different roles. So using that sea of data that Sophia mentioned, using those 2.2 billion different data points that we have, thinking about the outcome-driven placements that have come from that, we can start using AI to automatically match providers to these jobs. And then from there, we can go ahead and reach out to those providers like Joseph and let him know of this job match that we have available. Give him a little bit of information on what that job might look like. And if he's interested, he can start completing a survey through a chatbot engagement. And through that chatbot engagement, we can start asking him questions like when he's looking to start, if he has an active license in the specific location where that facility is, if he has the right credentials, how many years of experience he has, if that's going to be important for one of these positions. Oftentimes, right, maybe this is a facility that only requires a nurse if they have recent travel experience, right? We're able to gather all of these different data points, write that back to Joseph's record. So again, we can start matching better off of that information. We have it available to our recruiters. And more importantly, if Joseph wants to be expedited in this process or take that next step, he can go ahead and begin that screen. So all of those questions that we saw earlier, whether we created them or they were created by AI, Joseph can actually go through a screen and start answering all these questions. So why is he interested in this position? His experience with assessing patient conditions, right? Alice is going to lead him through this complete screen, asking questions when Joseph might be brief, acknowledging his answers so it feels very one-to-one. It's not a very generic experience. That's super important when we think about how we're interacting with our providers today, right? We want to make sure that we're able to provide that personalized experience, and Alice can facilitate all of that. More importantly, when we come down here too, Joseph can ask Alice questions as well. So if he wants to know about what the interview process might look like or next steps, if he wants to know about benefits, when I was a recruiter, man, did I get the benefits question every single time, did not matter when I was speaking with some of my providers. Alice can answer some of those questions back, and you dictate what information Alice can respond to. So this can all be controlled based off different settings that you have access to. So all of this can start happening, ultimately back to Sophia's point, that your recruiters are spending their time on the right candidates. And as we're getting all of this information back, ultimately what that's doing is aggregating the information so we can come in here and we can look at somebody like Sarah Jones who's completed a screen and look at her notes and see how she scored. So we're taking all of that information, Sarah's resume, how that equates to the job requirements, how that also equates to how she answered the questions that we have, and providing you this aggregate score, including a summary of that screen, an analysis, suggested areas of focus where maybe as a recruiter, when you have that conversation, you want to dig in a little bit deeper. You want to know a little bit more about that experience. And then of course you have that transcript. So you can see exactly what was asked, exactly how that was answered, all of this information, again, being transparent with that process. And ultimately that can start driving these candidates down other engagements. So if Joseph scored high, right, maybe 85, let's say for this specific ICU position, then that notifies the recruiter to pick up the phone and call Joseph, or maybe that sends Joseph to a calendar link to schedule time on that recruiter's calendar, right? All of this can be happening too outside of business hours. We know that oftentimes providers are applying for these positions outside of your typical 9 to 5 because their hours might be, different than our typical business hours. So it's important that we're able to interact with them while all of this is going on as well. So ultimately, again, providing this information so that when your recruiters are able to connect with those providers, they have more information. We've done our due diligence. And then ultimately taking that full circle to be able to submit them to that position, like Ahad had showed earlier. Now, with that being said, I'm going to pass it back over to Sophia. I think we do have some questions that we might want to jump into.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie and Hod, for showing us what this looks like in VMS Sync and also our AI agents. So really appreciate it. So our first question is, how customizable are the AI generated job descriptions and screening questions? Can we tweak the tone to match facility specific preferences? So Anne-Marie, I think this question is for you.
Yep. So with that prompt studio, that's really where you're able to jump in and really drive what you want those outcomes to look like, whether that's through those instructions, that voice or tone, the specific character limits, right? That's really where we can build into that. From a screening question perspective, too, you have the ability to include those defaults. You can see what's AI is generated. You always have the ability to go in and make edits too. This whole process, you can be as hands-on or hands-off as you want.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you one more AI question, and then I'm going to pivot to Ahad for some VMS questions since you're already speaking. So what does implementation and training look like, Anne-Marie? Like we're new, there's a lot of folks who are going to be new to Bullhorn AI, Prompt Studio, right? Like we kind of saw that folks are kind of struggling a little bit with adoption and best practices. So what do we have for that?
Yep. So implementation and training is pretty easy lift on your part when we think about it. With AI Assistant, we will connect you to that Bullhorn LLM that will help provide that generative content. When we think about the agents specifically, some of that screening and stuff, that's going to be a little bit more on the automation side. So just making sure that we have everything set up. Like Sophia, you mentioned, making sure there's best practice conversations. And also kind of what the overall strategy is for the firm too, of how much you want to lean into AI, maybe what that process might look like. We oftentimes see our customers have more of a phased approach of how they start implementing all of the different pieces.
Sure, that makes sense. I'm sure it probably depends on what kind of staffing firm you are and what your users are like and how do you manage change. It's pretty complicated. All right, Ahad, a question for you. We have from Amy. Can you confirm which credentials are set up with VMS submittals?
Yeah, so the credentials that get set up are your username and your password that you use to log into each individual VMS portal. And that's basically how we create that connection between the VMS portals from our client side into our ATS, and then back from our ATS into the VMS portal.
Awesome. And just so that folks know, we actually have 5 VMS submittals integrations that we have today. We have Fieldglass, Beeline, Pixid, Health Trust, and also Simple VMS. So those are the ones that we have. This is for both of you, Anne-Marie and Ahad. So this came through in the chat from Jessica. When will we see the AI assistant and VMS portal in our Bullhorn portals? Or where can you see it today? That might be a better question.
You want to jump in first, Ahad?
Yeah. So the VMS submittals, that is typically going to be something that we will see in the actions bar on a job. If you drop down, you will see VMS submittals. Also within the sync admin or control center, you'll also be able to see the submittal functionality there as well, from both submittals as well as submittal mapping, those two options. For the AI assistant, you will see in the top right-hand corner on your candidate records, your client contact records, and your job records, there'll be a little icon next to the action menu that says AI assistant. And let me see.
Once, of course, those are all enabled. So if you currently have submittals, you have AI Assistant enabled, that's when you'll be able to see all of those pieces.
Awesome.
So right next to your layout actually is where you'll see the AI assistant enabled as far as an option with the drop downs.
Okay, so we have this question for Marie. It's more VMS related, Ahad. So no example for right now for Health Trust has attachments for specific forms on their requisitions in the VMS. Do those pull into our portal for everyone to view? It's around like attachments for VMS requisitions.
Oh, so for the attachments themselves are going to be specified by the candidate file tab. So that's currently where we're indexing that information from, is we're looking at the file tab. So also when we think about the concept of credentials, for example, credentials should exist in both. You should actually have them within the credentialing module so that we can manage the expiration dates and validity of those credentials, but there should also be an attachment file with that as well. So right now it's just relegated to the job record, or I'm sorry, to the candidate record file tab.
Awesome. There is one question from Josh in the chat. If folks can actually put their questions in the question and answer box, that would be incredibly helpful, but I'll continue to monitor the chat. So Anne-Marie, this one's for you. I don't see AI Assistant on our Bullhorn. Do you have to upgrade to get it?
I would say connect with your account manager regarding that. Depending on if you already have it enabled, maybe there's just a couple additional steps. If you don't, it might be something to look at with them moving forward.
Awesome. Well, we're at time. We're actually at 46 minutes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Anne-Marie and Ahad, for showing us what this looks like in the product. We weren't able to get to everyone's question, and we'll make sure to follow up with the different folks, referencing our chat and also the Q&A box. So thank you so much for joining. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.